So, in this episode, I interview Ray Backer, who's one of the guides and founding members of Backtrack Adventures. And this episode's really interesting chat because Ray has been doing high altitude hiking for over 40 years in various different places around the world. And in this episode, we just dive into a few of his experiences and we talk through some of the insights he has around high altitude hiking and the different experiences he's faced around the world. A very interesting chat for any hiker who's planning on a high altitude adventure. Hey, my name is Rowan Smith and I want to welcome you to the Training for Trekking podcast. Now, this is the world's very first podcast which is entirely dedicated to helping you train, prepare and conquer your upcoming hike, trek or mountain adventure. So once a week, I'm going to be giving you quality and practical information on the subjects of physical preparation for trekking, dealing with altitude and nutrition on the trail, so you can know everything you need to be doing to have the best chance of a safe, enjoyable and successful adventure. So now you know what you're in for, let's get into today's episode. All right, hello, Ray. Big welcome to the show. I'm really looking forward to having you on board. So great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Rowan.
So to get into things, I guess to start with, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what do you do?
Okay. Well, my name's Ray Baker. I'm an ex-owner of Backtrack Adventures, founder and owner, and I retired in 2020. But I've come back in the capacity of just leading high altitude treks, and I've been trekking since 1979. Was my first trek in Nepal, and we started up as a commercial operation in 1984. So this is our 40th anniversary. And in that time, I've probably led close to 80 high altitude treks.
Yeah, fantastic. So you got a little bit of a background there. So I guess in over those 80 high altitude treks, like what types of places have you been?
Predominantly in the Himalaya. Probably led over a little over 60 in the Himalaya, mainly in Nepal, but also Bhutan, Sikkim, Indian Himalaya. And I've done, I think, 13 ascents of Kilimanjaro as well, the highest mountain in Africa. And things like the Inca Trail, I've done Kinabalu in Borneo, highest peak in Morocco, Toubkal in the Atlas Mountains. And I also, in a commercial trekking sense, I call anything over 4,000 metres high altitude.
Okay, good to know. So that'll be the perspective that we're looking through today for the listeners. Yes. I can't convert that to feet for our people over in the US off the top of my head, but 4,000 meters will work with it. So I guess with all of those different hikes you've done and all these different places in the world, just out of curiosity, are there any particular favorite adventures at high altitude you've had over the years, and or places to be, and any reason for those favorites?
Well, some particular favorites, of course, Kilimanjaro. It's probably not as visually attractive as the Himalaya, but the challenge on summit day, I always find a great attraction. It's just, I say to clients, the trek itself is not that hard, but summit day on Kilimanjaro is the hardest day of your life. and that's always been a big attraction for me. In the Himalaya, I love the Mount Everest area. In particular, my favourite part of the Mount Everest area is the Gokyo Valley. Drop dead beautiful scenery, great views of Mount Everest, and quieter trails, a lot less traffic than going to Mount Everest Base Camp. But there's been many favourites. Probably my favourite overall trek has probably actually been in the Indian Himalaya. I think the big attraction for that one, although it wasn't what I would call extremely high altitude, it only went up to about 4,200 metres. What we really enjoyed about it was the fact we could go into a country with over 2 billion people, and for 2 weeks, all we saw was the people in one village, one small village, and a few goat herders. And that was probably been my best trek, most enjoyable. But yeah, anywhere that gets me off the beaten track. And I have the philosophy that if I'm enjoying this, other people will as well. Yeah.
And then over the years, obviously you've got a big background here, and I imagine you've seen many different things on these trips you've led and been on yourself. But over the years of guiding people up to on these high altitude adventures, have you seen any changes in regards to just generally people's attitude, like perception, maybe preparations for these types of things?
Well, the big difference now that we're in the digital age, information is much more easily attained. So I find people are generally better prepared, particularly in terms of clothing and equipment, and fitness as well, and particularly in Australia, most trekking clients have already been overseas, so they've had travel experience, and overall, I find that people are better prepared, mentally and physically as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I imagine, when you say that the information now, I imagine there's probably a bit of a difference between people who, potentially went in pretty blind previously and maybe read a story or this and that, or read a magazine article, and someone who's spent hours and hours on YouTube going through videos of people on the trips and reading blog articles and this and that. Yeah, I imagine it'll be night and day in regards to that difference.
Exactly.
So I guess when we're looking at these trips, and obviously people on this podcast are really interested in preparation and being in the best possible position for these types of adventures. So over the years, what are some of the common mistakes you've seen from hikers on these high altitude adventures, and how would you as an operator or as a guide help people overcome these?
Okay, my main observation in other people, that is people not in my trekking group, is lack of acclimatisation. So, for example, Kilimanjaro. Some people do Kilimanjaro in 5 days. That is 3.5 up and 1.5 down. Now, with that, those trekkers, their success rate on Kilimanjaro, depending on where you're getting your information from, but it's somewhere between 50 and 60%. And I'd had 20 years high altitude experience before I first went to Kilimanjaro. And I had a look at it and the altitude, and I knew straight away that if I followed that sort of itinerary, up to half the group wouldn't get on top. And my ambition then and now is to get every single client on top of Kilimanjaro. partly because of the massive expense for the airfares alone flying to Africa from Australia. And so I devised a formula to give everybody the best chance to get on top. And that meant a 9-day trek, 7.5 up and 1.5 down. And of course, there's people who have illnesses unrelated to altitude, or they have injuries and they don't get on top. But with people leaving the high camp to make the ascent of the summit of Kilimanjaro, we have almost 100% success rate in the very, very high 90s. So, and also, I've observed people on the summit of Kilimanjaro who are really ill, and they're being dragged, supported by a couple of guides up to the top. They get to the summit, they sit down, their head in their hands, and they're there for a couple of minutes, then they've got to go down. And that experience is not what I would call a holiday experience. So I have a belief that I want my clients to get on top, remember it all, and enjoy it all, and take it all in. So, I think the acclimatisation over a number of days is absolutely essential. And of course, we have the same thing in Nepal. If you compared our high altitude treks to other companies, ours are always longer. Now, this stems from my own experience. I had my first case of high altitude sickness on my very first trek. That was the Annapurna circuit, and the high point Tarong Pass is, for our American friends, it's about 17,700 metres. In metric, it's 5,400 metres, something like that. And I had to turn back at about 3,500 metres. I was extremely ill. And that was a big tap on the shoulder. If you go too high too quick, because other people I was with, they were fine. And because acclimatisation, you don't know how you're going to go until you get there, because it's not reliant to a large extent on your age, your fitness, general health. It's your own personal metabolism. And my metabolism, I'm what I call the lowest common denominator. I don't acclimatise as well as others. So our rate of ascent is based on what I can achieve. And if I can achieve it, everyone else can too.
And then, obviously, you've been done lots of these adventures all around the world. And I think it'll be really, really interesting just to dive into, I guess some of the differences or specifics around different areas of the world for high altitude hiking. So looking at the different sort of, I guess, cultures or areas that you've done these adventures in, have you seen any major differences in how different cultures approach high altitude hiking?
Well, I find people that I've encountered that live in higher altitude remote areas, places like Nepal, India, the Highlanders, and the same with the people that live on the slopes of Kilimanjaro, are just wonderful, welcoming people with a they share a culture of friendliness and hospitality to strangers. And that, of course, filters through to our local guides. And it is one of the great joys of travelling to high altitude areas. It's not only the scenery, it's also the people. And I don't see a big difference between the cultures. And, you know, there's a strong shared character of them is the friendly hospitality. And also our guides in wherever we go to high altitude are so experienced. And I say to people on the first day of a trek, just give our guides 1 hour walking with you and they'll know more about you than you know yourself. And it's travel in general, you know, the cultures is a big part of it, but particularly mountain people are just sensational.
And then, do you have any, I guess, again, looking at different parts, different areas of hiking around the world, would you have any practical or specific tips for high altitude in different areas? So, for example, Nepal or Tanzania with Kili or Bhutan or, yeah, any specific tips for particular parts of the world?
Okay, well, to look at countries individually, first of all, you need to get the right pre-departure health information as opposed to, you know, what vaccinations you're likely to need, what particular strains of some illnesses are found in certain destinations, as if you need to take antibiotics if you get ill. But there's some common threads between different areas and different treks, and health preparation is a very important one, and so is fitness. I think the fitter you are, the more you'll enjoy the adventure. And don't be in a hurry. If you go into high altitude, you know, oh, look, you might say to yourself, oh, I've only got 2 weeks for this holiday. So therefore, instead of doing this trek in the recommended 10 days, I'm going to do it in 8. Well, then you're leaving yourself open to potential altitude sickness, you know. Also, other preparations, I think, you know, clothing and equipment is very important, the right choice. And if you're going to go with a commercial operator, don't look at the first price you see. Look at the inclusions, what you get on that price. And an extra price, if it includes, it's more expensive because they take a couple of days longer to acclimatise. Well, you know, health and safety is more important than saving a few bucks.
Absolutely. And I guess I'm going to fire a couple of questions now that everyone, the listeners, always love, and nice, easy ones.
Yep.
But yeah, very, very, very easy to answer and very, very practical. So, do you personally have any favorite meals or favorite snacks that you like to have on these high altitude adventures?
Well, yeah, I follow what I call a light diet. And that means as soon as it gets light, I start eating. Of course, a big breakfast at the start of the day is essential, you know. Eat more than you would normally eat at home because you're going to burn it up. And snacks, I love like trail mixes, dried nuts, dried fruit. I eat a lot of chocolate for that mid-meal energy boost. There's not many foods that I don't eat, but in particular when I am trekking, it's your complex carbohydrates, what I find are really important with that longer, slower release of energy for the endurance type activity that you're doing, So rice, pasta, noodles, breads, things like that, In sort of remote high altitude areas, you're going to find it difficult to get a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables, but in the course of a 2-week trek, you're not going to get scurvy. So I think the bulk food, a lot of it, is possibly more important than your high nutrient type meals, But big bowls of pasta, big bowls of rice, I love. It's really important to eat that type of stuff, Drinks, but I'll just go back to food again. I think that is your fuel. You don't go into an adventurous type activity and look upon food as a gourmet treat. You need to look upon it as fuel, and you need to keep fueled up and keep eating a lot of it. You're going to burn it off. You're not going to put on weight. No problems there. And that has to be countered with there's a mild early warning symptom of altitude sickness. There's a number of them, but one of them is loss of appetite. I think the lack of the oxygen, in the air does affect your body. So some people have loss of appetite, but I find that it's not a complete loss of appetite. It's only certain foods that you cannot face, but you'll find there's always something that you can eat. Whether it might be just soup, it might be plain rice, it might be just sweets or chocolate or whatever, but you just get in as much of it into you as you can.
And then similar question, let's talk about gear and equipment, because again, hikers love this. So do you have any particular must-have pieces of equipment or gear that you'd recommend to a high-altitude hiker?
Oh, yes. Well, the cold, to give you an idea, the air temperature alone on the summit of Kilimanjaro is somewhere between -10 and -15. Now, if there's a breeze, then you get the wind chill factor, right? So you might get a fine day, you might get a really, really windy, cold, black day. So in terms of clothing and equipment, I say to people, in terms of weather, expect the best, but prepare for the worst. So the most important layer is the layer worn against the body, thermal underwear. And the best I find is merino wool. And depending on where I'm trekking, I may have 2 layers of thermal underwear. And then you have your fleece layers, maybe a light fleece and maybe a heavier fleece. And then you have your shell garment, your windproof, waterproof jacket that goes over the top of everything and traps the heat in. You need a warm beanie for your head, a lot of heat loss through the top of the head. You need warm gloves. I suggest for something like Kilimanjaro, you have a minimum of 2 layers of gloves, a thin layer, and then a thick thermal layer. over the top. Yeah, and something to. You need a jacket. Your shell jacket should also have a hood, a high collar, Velcro around the sleeves, drawstring around the waist area, so that it closes completely and traps all your body heat in there. Yeah, and boots. Well, they're probably the most important item of equipment. And if you're going to do an extended trek in remote areas on rough trails, then I would go into a specialist outdoor shop and get your boots properly fitted, wearing socks. I wouldn't buy a pair of boots online. I would always try them on in a shop. I think it's vital. And my second most vital item of equipment is my trekking poles. Correctly used with the right technique, I think they've extended my trekking life for a couple of decades, I think, particularly the support they give you going downhill. And if you use them correctly going uphill, you transfer a lot of the weight into your upper body and take it away from your legs as well, which is, I find, vital as well. So, I'm blessed living in Brisbane, because only 15 minutes drive from the city centre, we've got, we call it a mountain. I think it's only about 500 metres high, but it's large. It's got a lot of up and downhill trails, and it's an ideal training area. So I think, anything you're going to be using, your pack, your clothing, your poles, your boots, get used to them training before you leave. Yeah.
And a lot of our, I know our listeners out on this podcast, they have a big background in hiking. They like to get on the weekends, maybe done some multi-days or whatever it may be. But I know there is a good solid chunk of listeners who, have always had that thought of doing a high altitude hike one day. They've always dreamt of Everest Base Camp or Kili or something like that. But realistically, they live absolutely nowhere near any mountains, whether they're in Australia and they're completely, no access to altitude, whether they're over in somewhere else and they're just in the flatlands. If they're in this situation where they have always dreamt about a high altitude hike, but lives absolutely nowhere near the mountains, what words of advice would you give them?
Do the best you can with what you've got to work with. That is, all movement, all training is good. If you only have a flat area, if you live in Central Australia without a mountain in sight, still get out and walk. Engage the services of a fitness professional. Tell them what you're doing, and they could recommend some good exercises to do at home to strengthen your legs and your back. Just do the best you can, and do it on a regular basis. I mean, if you go trekking, you're going to be walking day after day after day after day. When you're at home in your normal life, you may not have the time to do it, right? So you just do as much as you can. But what I do myself is I exercise every day. And if I'm not doing a longer training exercise, I'll get up half an hour earlier and go for a brisk walk for half an hour before breakfast. It all helps. It all adds an extra layer to your preparation, everything you do, whether it's your training, whether it's what you eat, the amount of recovery you have, how well you sleep. It all helps.
And then you mentioned at the start of the episode that you've got a long history with backtrack adventures and obviously lead trips and guide trips for them these days. Could you just tell us a little bit more about backtrack adventures? Who they are, what they do, and just tell us a bit more about them.
Okay, well, the genesis of Backtrack was actually in 1982 when I did the Annapurna circuit. I asked a mate to go with me, Jim, who ended up being my business partner. So we did the Annapurna circuit together, made a lot of mistakes, but we couldn't believe what a great adventure it was. And we thought, well, look, if we like this, other people will as well. So we hummed and hawed for a couple of years and didn't stop talking about it. And then one day we decided, right, let's do it. So we advertised to take some people over the around the Annapurna circuit, and the response was fantastic. We needed 10 people, but we actually got 30. So we divided it up into two groups, a day apart on the trail, and made a lot of mistakes. But we had experienced guides with us, so the mistakes we made were lessened by their advice. And so from there, we planned other trips in Nepal. Nepal was the only tour operation that we did for about the first 5 years. We also opened up a clothing and equipment shop at the same time. And then we also got into other areas. We got into Africa in a big way. We still are with safaris. And we also started going around the world, different trekking areas. But we also opened up another division of Backtrack, and that was our retail division. So, we can book flights, book hotels, arrange travel insurance. We used to arrange a visa service before it became easier to do online. And we started to specialise in those hard to travel destinations like Africa, South America. In the late 90s, we developed a big expertise in cruising. So that's a big part of our operation as well. So we can send anybody anywhere in the world and arrange it. And so we sell a lot of other companies' trips as well. But we have our core high altitude trekking as well in the Himalaya and Kilimanjaro. Yeah.
And then if people wanted to find out a little bit more about Backtrack, check out the trips, learn a little bit more about what you offer, where should they go? Where's the easiest place to find out more?
That's our website, www.backtrackadventures.com.au.
Fantastic.
But also, we're at the end of the phone as well. We don't put people on hold. You don't have to press buttons to talk to a particular area. You call, the phone will be picked up.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, what I'll do is I'll leave details for that in the show notes below of the episode. So anyone who's interested in checking them out, just go down below the video, check out the notes, and you'll be able to find there. Yeah. But all in all, Ray, it's been really, really great having you on today. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on, share some background, what you do, some great piece of advice, and I really do hope some of the words of wisdom can inspire a few people out there, and I think a lot of people will get some great information from today's chat. So thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, Rowan, thanks very much. I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much.